author. She's read loads. I've read loads of her books. She's really, really. Yeah, I know. Mrs. Clay loves her too. So, The Secret of Platform 13. So we've got The Secret of Platform 13, and this is chapter 1. If you went into a school nowadays and said to the children, "What is a gump?" you would probably get some very silly answers. It's a person without a brain, like a chump, a child might say. Or it's a camel whose hump has got stuck. Or even, it's a kind of chewing gum. But once this wasn't so. Once, every child in the land could have told you that a gump was a special mound, a grassy bump on the earth, and that in this bump was a hidden door which opened every so often to reveal a tunnel which led to a completely different world. They would have known that every country has its own gump, and that in Great Britain, the gump was in a place called the Hill of the Cross of Kings, not far from the River Thames. And the wise children, the ones that read the old stories and listened to the old tales, would have known more than that. They would have known that this particular gump opened for exactly 9 days, every 9 years, and not 1 second longer. And that it was no good changing your mind about coming or going, because nothing would open the door once the time was up. But the children forgot. Everyone forgot. And perhaps you can't blame them. Yet the gump is still there. It is under platform 13 of King's Cross railway station. And the secret door is behind the wall of the old gentleman's cloakroom, with its floppy posters saying, "Trains get you there," and its chipped wooden benches and the dirty ashtrays in which the old gentleman used to stub out their smelly cigarettes. No one uses the platform now. They have built newer, smarter platforms with rows of shiny luggage trolleys and slot machines that actually work, and television screens which show you how late your train is going to be. But platform 13 is different. The clock has stopped. Spiders have spun their webs across the cloakroom door. There's a left luggage office with a notice saying "not in use," and inside it is an umbrella covered in mould which a lady left on the 525 from Doncaster, the year of the Queen's Silver Jubilee. The chocolate machines are rusty and lopsided, and if you're foolish enough to put your money in one, it would make a noise like "humph" and swallow it, and you would wait for the rest of your life for the chocolate to come out. Yet when people tried to pull down this part of the station and redevelop it, something always went wrong. An architect who wanted to build shops there suddenly came out in awful boils and went to live in Spain, and when they tried to relay the tracks for electricity, the surveyor said the ground wasn't suitable and muttered something about subsidence and cracks. It was as though people knew something about platform 13, but they didn't know what. But in every city, there are those who have not forgotten the old days, all the old stories. The ghosts, for example, Ernie Hobbs, the railway porter who'd spent all his life working at King's Cross and still liked to haunt around the trains. He knew, and so did his friend, the ghost of a cleaning lady called Mrs. Partridge, who used to scrub out the parcels office on her hands and knees. The people who plodged about in the sewers under the city and came up occasionally through the manholes beside the station, they knew, and so in their own way did the pigeons. They knew that the gump was still there, and they knew where it led. By a long, misty and mysterious tunnel to a secret cove where a ship waited to take those who wished, to an island so beautiful that it took your breath away. The people who lived on it just called it the island, but it had all sorts of names. Avalon, St. Martin's Land, the place of the sudden mists. Years and years ago it was joined to the mainland, but then it broke off and floated away slowly westwards, just as Madagascar floated away from the continent of Africa. Islands do that every few million years. It is nothing to make a fuss about. With the floating island, of course, came the people who were living on it. Sensible people, mostly, who understood that everyone did not have to have exactly 2 arms and legs, but might be different in shape and different in the way they thought. So they lived peacefully with ogres who had 1 eye, or dragons, or of whom there were lots about in those days. They didn't leap into the sea every time they saw a mermaid comb her hair on a rock. They simply said, "Good morning." They understood that Ella women and hollowbacks and hated to be looked at on a Saturday, and that if trolls wanted to wear their beards so long that they stepped on them every time they walked, then they could. They lived in peace with the animals too. There were lots of interesting animals on the island, as well as ordinary sheep and cows and goats. Giant birds who had forgotten how to fly and laid eggs the size of kettle drums. There were all sorts of strange and wonderful animals, but it was the mist makers that the people of the island loved the most. These endearing animals are found nowhere else in the world. They are white and small with soft fur all over their bodies, rather like baby seals. But they don't have flippers. They have short legs and big feet like the feet of puppies. Their black eyes are huge and moist. Their noses are whiskery and cool, and they pant a little as they move because they look rather like small pillows and they don't like going very fast. The mist makers weren't just nice, they were exceedingly important. Because as the years passed and newspapers were washed up on the shore or refugees came through the gump with stories of the world above, the islanders became more and more determined to be left alone. Of course, they knew that some modern inventions were good, like electric blankets to keep people's feet warm in bed or fluoride to stop teeth from rotting, but there were other things they didn't like at all, like nuclear weapons or tower blocks at the tops of which old ladies shivered and shook because the lift was broken, or battery hens stuffed into cages, and they dreaded being discovered by passing ships or aeroplanes flying too low. This is where the mistake makers came in. These sensitive creatures, you see, absolutely adore magic. When you play music to a mist maker, its eyes grow wide and it lets out a breath and gives a great sigh. It will sigh. And each time it sighs, mist comes from its mouth. Clean, thick, white mist which smells of early morning and damp grass. There are hundreds and hundreds of mist makers lolloping over the turf along the shore of the island. That means a lot of mist. So when a ship is sighted or a speck in the sky that might be an aeroplane, or the children run out of school with their flutes and their trumpets and their recorders and start to play to the mist makers. And the people who might have landed and coaxed and cried saw only clouds of whiteness and went on their way. Though there were so many unusual creatures on the island, the royal family were entirely human, and always had been. They were royal in the proper sense, not greedy, not covered in jewels, but brave and fair. They saw themselves as servants of the people, which is how all good rulers should think of themselves, but sadly often don't. The king and queen didn't live in a golden palace full of uncomfortable gilded thrones which stuck into people's behinds when they sat down, nor did they fill their palace with servants who fell over footstools when walking backwards from their majesties. They lived in a low white house on a curving beach of golden sand studded with shells, and always, day or night, they could hear the murmur of the slap of the waves and the gentle sloshing of the wind. The rooms of the palace were simple and cool. The windows were kept open so that birds could fly in and out. Intelligent dogs lay sleeping by the hearth. Bowls of fresh fruit and fragrant flowers stood on the tables, and everyone who had nowhere to go, orphan little hags or seals with sore flippers or wizards who'd become depressed, found sanctuary there. And in the year 1983, the year the Americans put a woman into space, the Queen, who was young and kind and beautiful, had a baby, and that is where this story really, really begins. The baby was a boy, and it was everything a baby should be. Bright eyes, funny tuft of hair, a button nose, and interesting ears. Not only that, but the little prince could whistle before he was a month old. Not proper tunes, but a nice peeping noise like a young bird. The queen was absolutely besotted with her son, and the king was so happy that he thought he would burst. And all over the island the people rejoiced, because you can tell very early how a boy is going to turn out, and they could see that the prince was going to be just the kind of ruler that they wanted. Of course, as soon as the child was born, there were queues of people around the palace wanting to look after him and be his nurse. Wise women who wanted to teach him things, and sirens who wanted to sing to him, and hags who wanted to show him weird tricks. There was even a mermaid who seemed to think she could look after a baby, even if it meant she had to trundle around the palace in a bath on wheels. But although the queen thanked everyone most politely, the nurse she chose for her baby was an ordinary human. Or rather, it was 3 ordinary humans, triplets, whose names were Violet and Lily and Rose. They had come to the island as young girls and were proper trained nursery nurses who knew how to change nappies, bring up wind, sieve vegetables, and the fact that they couldn't do any magic was a relief to the Queen, who sometimes felt she had enough magic in her life. Having triplets seemed to her a good idea, because looking after babies goes on night and day, and this way there would always be someone with spiky red hair and a long nose and freckles to soothe the prince and rock him and sing to him, and he wouldn't be startled by the change, because however remarkable the baby was, he wouldn't be able to tell Violet from Lily or Lily from Rose. So the three nurses came, and they did indeed look after the prince most devotedly, and everything went beautifully for a while. But when the baby was 3 months old, there came the time of the opening of the gump, and after that, nothing was ever the same again.